Welcome to the Danny Sun radio show, and on this show we have a wide variety of special guests, and we got a very special guest on today's show, and great to have her on board, Abigail Harrison, an aspiring astronaut from the Mars generation. This is a special feature on today's show with me, DJ Danny. Very good afternoon from this side of the Atlantic, Abigail. How are we today?
Doing quite well, thank you, Danny. Glad to be on.
Yeah, great to hear. And you're an aspiring astronaut, and you have quite a following on the social media and on the circuit and what have you. Where did your inspiration for space exploration begin?
I've wanted to be an astronaut for as long as I can remember. Ever since I was probably 4 or 5 years old, I can remember looking up at the stars, going outside at night, and just having this sense of wonder and having so many questions, and also knowing that I wanted to help solve some of those questions, find the answers, and really to travel in space. And so it's something that started as a child and stayed a very strong passion as I grew up, and has grown into a way to do science and STEM outreach as well.
So you started off young, and you're still very young now. How old are you now, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 21.
Wow, that's very young. So you started off young, still young, and still learning and developing. So if you want to go into space exploration astronaut, do you have to? Is it more ideal if you start at a younger age?
No. Not necessarily. Mm-hmm. There are so many different routes that you can take towards becoming an astronaut or becoming involved in the space industry in a lot of other ways. And in fact, when you look at the histories of a lot of our past astronauts, some of them didn't realize that they wanted to be involved in space travel until their 30s or until their 40s. Some made career changes to become involved. So there's really a wide variety. Okay. and no set, like, this is the correct way. It's different for everyone.
Okay, good, wonderful. And so Mars is the mission at the moment. Is that correct for yourself? You're learning about Mars, the planet, and how we can colonize the planet.
So Mars is my personal goal. That's what I believe that we should be aspiring to reach with this generation, is gaining confidence in interplanetary travel by going to Mars. However, I don't think that colonization should be or will be within our recent future. Yeah. It's definitely going to be more so a visiting and returning type of mission.
Sure. So it's small steps to Mars.
Exactly. So using it as a stepping stone so that we can learn how to explore the rest of our solar system and eventually universe.
Yeah. So in the news lately, they said that they found discovery of liquid water found on Mars. Is that another step closer to a positive sign of being able to set foot on the planet, so to speak?
Absolutely. So every time we're living in a really exciting time for space travel right now, because we have so much new information that is coming out. And that's one of those new bits of information, is that there's the potential. I like to always correct that the media has a tendency to grab hold of exciting news such as the potential of water on Mars and run a little amok with it. So it's not necessarily that there is liquid reservoirs of water, but that there's a study that showed that there's evidence pointing towards there being liquids reservoirs on Mars. Yeah. But I would say that increases our need to do further exploration of Mars, and in particular send humans to Mars, because now we're starting to find potential evidence for these really, really game-changing things, like having large amounts of liquid water on Mars. And the next step would be to confirm that through further exploration.
Sure. Also, the overemphasizing in the social media news, they kind of have a thing. They always have a thing of blowing things up out proportion. Like in today's paper, global warming, with rising sea levels and global warming, the planet heating up. If humans find it hard to look after their own planet, how are they going to look after Mars? Can we learn from our mistakes from this planet and transfer it to Mars?
Absolutely. I think that we definitely should be keeping that as a consideration.
Hmm.
And I would say that when you look at the ways that we've approached space exploration so far, we have learned from our mistakes and are really, in many ways, doing our best to protect places that we visit. So,
Hmm.
for example, there's very strong planetary protection that's pursued by NASA, where they make sure to the best extent, the best of their abilities, that we're not sending any microbes
Hmm.
or extra life forms on things that we send to Mars to not contaminate or alter the
Hmm.
planet in any way. And so I would say we have a good history so far of being responsible
Yeah.
with and ethical with space travel and that means. And I would hope that we continue to do that in the future as we increase our interaction with the planet.
Of course. So, on Mars, I read there's a lot of radiation. How has this radiation come about, and is it dangerous on Mars when visiting?
Yeah, that is one of the biggest issues with interplanetary travel is that you face much higher levels of
Hmm.
radiation than you do on Earth or even around when we're in the Earth's orbit. So, for the past 30 or so years, we've been focused on near Earth exploration. So, things like the International Space Station, which stay within the Earth's orbit and therefore are protected by what's called the Earth's magnetosphere, which is basically a shield that the Earth projects around itself that we're really fortunate to have, protects us from a good portion of solar and galactic radiation. However, Mars doesn't have this magnetosphere shield. And so not only do you face radiation while you're traveling to Mars, but you also face radiation on the surface of Mars that we have to be really careful to protect astronauts from.
Thank you very much for explaining that. And
Mm-hmm.
we recently had a phenomenon with the blood moon. Can you explain briefly what the blood moon eclipse is and how it happened or how it happens?
Yeah, so we had a couple interesting things that happened recently. One of them was that we had a really close approach of Mars, where uh, well, it's pretty self-explanatory in that
Hmm.
Mars has different orbits or it has an orbit that will sometimes align with Earth's to bring it closer or farther away. And when it's close, like it has been recently, it's much easier to see in the night sky. It's the closest that it's been since
Yeah.
2003. So if you haven't yet, I would totally recommend going outside and taking a look at it. As far as the blood moon, that's what happens when the moon turns this really deep
Hmm.
red or almost reddish brown color during eclipses. And it has to do with the way that, so instead of going completely dark during the eclipse, it has to do with the way that the Earth's atmosphere bends the light and
Hmm.
allows it to still receive some light, which colors it that red color and is really spectacular to look at. So it's been a couple good nights for astronomy.
Fascinating. And how many moons? How many moons does Mars have? And are they inhabitable? Can the astronauts set foot on there before they segue to the actual planet?
That is such a great question. So Mars has two moons,
Hmm.
Phobos and Deimos, and there's a lot of speculation within the scientific and space communities about the idea of using those as outposts of sorts,
Hmm.
of using them as a way of exploring Mars without the difficulties of landing on the surface. One of the large difficulties that we have with human exploration of Mars, as we start to look more into how that would be possible, is that it is really hard to land things on the
Hmm.
surface of
Hmm.
Mars. Mars has enough of an atmosphere that it makes boosters difficult, but not enough of an atmosphere to use parachutes like you would on Earth. And
Hmm.
so, for example, when you look at Curiosity, it was one of the largest things we've landed on Mars, the Curiosity rover, and it had a very unique sky crane approach to doing so. But we're going to have to figure out better ways of doing that to land
Hmm.
larger quantities of supplies and eventually humans for human missions. But we could get around that by not landing on Mars and landing on Phobos or Deimos instead, and then exploring from there.
Wonderful. And how do astronauts eat in space? What does the food taste like?
So, thankfully, it's no longer usually eating goo out of tubes or anything like that. The food has gotten quite sophisticated over the past couple decades. They do still have to adhere to a handful of rules, which means that obviously you're not going to be having fresh food, fresh fruits and vegetables all of the time, because it's dependent on cargo shipments and such from Earth. And so you end up with a lot of packaged or rehydratable type things. And then another consideration that astronauts really have to look into with food is how will it react in microgravity. So the example that I always give to kids when I'm speaking in schools is that if you're eating a piece of bread on Earth and you're munching on it, a couple crumbs fall off, it's no big deal. They fall on your plate, they fall on the table, you wipe them off. But if you're eating that same piece of bread in space and those crumbs fall off, they start to float away and they could get into electronics or machinery and start to cause some serious problems with the systems. And so you have to look at using alternatives that work better in microgravity. So the solution for that is, instead of eating bread, astronauts substitute in tortillas because they don't crumble. And so there's a lot of small things like that are actually very normal foods that we eat here on Earth that astronauts also eat. However, it's really cool. The exciting one that we can look at in the future, though, is that over the past couple of years, they've started to grow fresh vegetables on the International Space Station. And astronauts have actually eaten salads that were grown on the space station. And that's absolutely essential if we want to go past low Earth orbit. If we want to go to Mars, we have to figure out how to not be dependent for fresh food being supplied by Earth, but rather to be able to produce it en route.
Ace, and ace that is, and well answered. And just a couple more to go before the interview concludes. What is gravity feels like? What does it feel like when you're floating in space with gravity?
So I haven't actually been to space yet, but I've heard that it's quite similar in feeling to floating in a pool. That feeling of not having to support yourself, and that can be one of the closest ways that we can get to simulating that here on Earth. Astronauts oftentimes, I've heard from a lot of them that I've talked to, that they have a hard time readjusting when they get back to Earth because they become so used to things around them not having gravity that one of the funny stories I've heard is that they'll, about a week after, I heard this from one astronaut, a week after returning to Earth, he was writing something and he went and held his pen out afterwards and just dropped it because he was expecting that he would let go of the pen and it would stay where he put it because nothing was pulling on it or pushing on it. And it fell to the ground and he looks at it in just complete shock and then takes a moment to realize, oh, yes, I'm back on Earth. We do have gravity now. So that's one of the big readjustments with that.
Very interesting. And what is the physical training like to be an astronaut? Is it as tense as it appears? And what does a typical day's training entail?
Training to be an astronaut can really take on a lot of different forms. Astronauts are definitely jacks of all trades. So the way that it works is that an astronaut, at least through NASA, will be selected to be a part of the astronaut corps. And then at some point after their selection, they'll be assigned a mission. Once they're assigned a mission, there's usually a 2 or 2.5 year period where they're training specifically for that mission. And so they'll start to hone certain skill sets or whatnot based on the experiments, the extravehicular, so spacewalks, or whatever it is that the purpose of their time in space will be, they'll start to train for. They'll also start to train with our Russian counterparts because we currently launch on the Russian Soyuz. And so they spend about 6 months in Russia learning how to operate those vehicles. as far as the physical intensity of training to be an astronaut, it's really important that astronauts are physically fit. And this is because you want to have a really good bone density and muscle mass built up before you go to space, because microgravity has a tendency to cause both of those things to deteriorate pretty rapidly. However, that's not the kind of thing that you can just start working on once you get accepted or once you get assigned a mission. Most astronauts are lifelong athletes. You can look at them, and many of them run marathons or have hobbies that they're really passionate about that keep them quite fit.
So it's a long journey. And if someone made a film about your journey, who would you like to play it in a film or a documentary?
Oh gosh, I have no idea. I really haven't thought about that. I'm not very up to date on my movie stars or anyone, so I'll have to get back to you on that.
Sure. And this is such a generic question, but have you had any encountering with any UFOs, or do you think they exist?
I have not had encounters with UFOs personally, but I think that the concept behind them, really what UFO means is unidentified flying object. And so that can be interpreted as anything from the wildest of our imaginations of, I saw something at night and it was an alien spacecraft, to to even just seeing a comet passing through the atmosphere or such and not being quite sure what it is. So I've definitely seen things like comets that I haven't been able to fully label or pinpoint, but that's about the extent of it for me.
No problem. And do you believe in synchronicity, how the planets align? Cosmic forces. Do you know how things, rare things happen and phenomenons? Do you believe that there's something where the planets actually make our destiny? Like say, it's not necessarily star signs, but coincidences. Can they happen as a cause of planets interlining or what have you?
Personally, I do not believe in that. I do not see any way or evidence that would support that. However, there is a lot of really interesting stuff that you can look at with the way that planets and planetary bodies align. For instance, our moon has a really strong effect on Earth because it helps to control the tides of our oceans. And the moons of planets like Jupiter have the opposite effect, where Jupiter is so large that it's causing its moons, the amount of gravity that it exerts on them causes them to have constantly fluctuating movement of the moon itself, and that helps to generate this heat that we believe could keep liquid water in its liquid state, which is really exciting because usually you need internal heat, and this time it's coming from an external force. And the way that planets and moons are aligned throughout their orbits or whatnot definitely can change how they affect one another in that sense.
So a few more to go. What is the world's greatest invention in your opinion?
The world's greatest invention. Wow. Let's see. I'm going to have to go with real simple here, real, throwback on this one, Velcro.
Oh, wow.
Velcro is the world's greatest invention.
Wow.
When you look at it, it's very commonly used on the space station. It's super, it's like I mentioned earlier, a lot of times in microgravity, you might just let something go and it'll float away. And so everything in the International Space Station or in other space capsules or vehicles has to be strapped down in some way, and one of the most efficient ways to do that is Velcro. So I think that's a real solid one.
Good old Velcro. And and finally, we're going to finish on some music now. Do you have a favourite space song and space movie?
Yes. So my favorite space movie would definitely be it's a tie between The Martian, of course, because it was such a fantastic both book and movie. And Apollo 13.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, really
Wonderful.
great film.
Yeah. And
And then
Space Song.
Space Song. I'm a really big fan. This isn't quite a space song, but it has some connections to space, of Ride, Sally, Ride.
Oh, yeah, the Mustang Sally. Is that the one?
Yeah, Mustang Sally,
Oh, wow.
which was not written about space, but it was played to Sally Ride when she was in space. So Mission Control used to play songs every morning to wake astronauts up. And Mission Control was the ones who controlled what was playing. And so they got to choose. And they used to wake her up every morning for about a week, I want to say, with that song.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for taking the time out to speak to me out of your busy schedule. And I wish you all the best on your voyage, Abigail. And do check us in with your progress in the near future. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me on, Danny. And if you'd like to keep up with my progress, or your listeners they're welcome to find me on pretty much every social media channel as Astronaut Abby, where I share my journey towards becoming an astronaut, all the ins and outs, the everyday parts of it. Online. And I would like to invite everyone to go ahead and look for the Mars Generation, which is the nonprofit that I started to help share space exploration and STEM, so science, tech, engineering, and math, with people all around the world.
Great stuff. Thank you very much. And we'll get this interview out, and no doubt people will learn from it. I've learned so much today from your interview today, and all the best. Thank you so much.
Thanks. I have to say that you had some really wonderful questions, so it was a real pleasure to talk with you, and I look forward to hearing the interview.
Great to hear. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye, Danny.